The Weird Man in the Woods. This happened about 22 years ago when I was 11. My parents bought a house in a rather rural area. I had always been around nature, so I didn't mind the change. I just wished there were more kids my age. I spent a lot of time with my parents or helping the elderly neighbors with chores. I was homeschooled and awkward as fuck. My mother did not believe in busy homework. If I knew the subject, she rewarded me with time off. I was to play for at least 3 hours a day, so I took to walking around the area, pretending to be an explorer. I got to know a lot of the workers, and they sometimes brought me fruit and treats. Unfortunately, I was the only person under 18 for miles. My sister had moved out with her boyfriend after her graduation, and she rarely called. We had never been close, and to this day, we barely keep tabs on one another. Back then, it would have been impossible to make her care about anything other than her own life. The town was trying everything it could to bring young families into the area. It prospered in later years, with its own school and activities building. But back then, it was half-developed lots, a few houses, and a half-hearted attempt at a park. The area was ringed by forest on one side, and farmland on the other side. To keep me occupied, my father came home with a dog. He thought it would be good protection and teach me responsibility. Instead of the cute, fluffy Yorkie I'd begged for, I ended up with an old German Shepherd named Art. He was slightly overweight, had one good eye and shedded. I fell in love with him instantly. He belonged to my father's old war buddy, a former police officer who trained security dogs for a living. He was moving into the city and could not take Art with him. Like most of our animals, Art was inherited slightly used and well-loved. Everyone in the family really liked him, but Art took to me instantly. I was his new mission. I could not leave the room without him following. When I used the bathroom, he would press his nose to the door and thump his tail against the hardwood floor. He insisted on sleeping with me. When people approached, Art stood in front of me and would not let them by unless they gave him a pat on the head and a good word. The best part was a series of commands that came written on a small sheet of paper. Art could sit, roll over, shake hands, play dead, look ashamed, guard, and protect. I never uttered the order because my father said it could be dangerous. The rest were hours of fun. I even taught him to play fetch and go swimming in the local lake. I was always careful with Art. He was 10 years old and starting to slow down, as my father said, but he could walk long distances and listen to secrets, so there was no need for a wild, crazy puppy. I loved Art with all the passion of a child. He was my best friend, and to this day I speak about him like he was some sort of cousin or a brother. He was more of a sibling than my sister ever was. One day, near the end of September, Art and I were walking the edge of the forest, near the newly cultivated lots. I was 2 blocks from any of the houses. I was asking Art what we should do when he laid down on the grass and rolled over. I sat down too, annoyed when the grass started to soak my jeans, but I was tired from running through the park, and it felt good to just relax. About 30 minutes passed, and I was cold, tired, and hungry. Dinner would be on soon, and the forest was starting to look ominous. I was getting to my feet when I heard the sound of boots on gravel. I didn't think anything at first. It was a familiar sound. I turned to face a rather plainly dressed man. He wore a black windbreaker, dirty jeans, and thick worker boots. His face was covered in a rough beard, and he looked like he had come back from a hard day under a hot sun. At first, I thought he was one of the surveyors coming to look at the land. I had gotten yelled at before for walking on private property, but the land was open and there were no signs, so I didn't think this was one of the choice spots for building. He also, I noticed, didn't have any usual tools or gear, no book to write anything down in. When I looked him in the face, he had an intense look, like he had just found a riddle he could not solve. I knew something was wrong when Art sat down in front of me. The man stopped, held up his hands, and asked, "Does that thing bite?" "He does," I said. "He used to be a police dog." And at that moment, the rather rotund, friendly dog I was used to turned into a very dangerous, very serious threat, at least to the man in front of me. "Ah," the man said. "I need to go now," I said. It was the truth, but I wanted to go now. I usually lingered until the very last moment. Now my legs itched and I scratched at them. "I just want to talk to you," the man said. "I have to go home. My mom's waiting for me," I said. The man came closer and closer, one small step at a time. I backed away. I was all of 80 pounds. He looked close to 250 pounds. Luckily, Art weighed in close to at 100 pounds, which made it easier for me to calm down, at least on the outside. I was wondering if you could point me in the direction of South Street," the man said, his tone even. "That way," I said, pointing. He looked, nodded, and then turned around. The tension drained from me. I started to walk away. The moment I had my back to him, the man grabbed my shoulders and tried to pull me into the woods. I screamed. I flailed. Art lunged and latched onto the man's ankle. The man dropped me, kicking at Art with his boots. I took off running towards one of our neighbors' homes. The man who lived there had watched me a few times when my parents were out of town, and I called him Grandpa Pat. I could hear the man screaming and the sounds of cloth ripping. I made it into Grandpa Pat's yard and burst into his house. Grandpa Pat was not at home, but his granddaughter, Lily, was sitting on the couch. Despite being 28 years old, she listened to me like I was an adult. She called my parents, the police, and then her grandfather. Art turned up in the yard 10 minutes later. Some jean thread stuck in his teeth. He had a few scars where the man punched him, but he was no worse for the wear. I don't know what I would have done if my dad bought me a Yorkie instead of a former police dog. The man was caught a few weeks later trying to climb in the window to get to the 3-year-old boy who lived in my neighbor's house. Mom has pretty hair. In 1977, my mother graduated high school. She was from a very small town in southern Illinois called Crossville. Being from such a small town, her and her classmates were really close. They used to drive around all over and stay in abandoned farmhouses or go camping out in the woods. Lots of stories there too. My mom was joining the army in September, but before she left, her classmates wanted to hang out a lot. One of her friends had family in Missouri, and almost every summer, they would go canoeing down the Current River. Since they were all old enough, they decided to make a senior trip, and had been planning it since before they graduated. It was only going to be a 4-day trip. On the first day, my mom and 4 friends drove from Crossville to Eminence, Missouri. On the next day, they started canoeing. They had been canoeing for about 5 hours and were very hot. They came to a spot where the river was shallow enough you could wade around. They saw a little boy who looked about 10 years old walking across the river. He had long black hair and was only wearing underwear. He was holding a mason jar, and my mom and her friends thought he had spring water. My mom yelled out to the boy, "Hey, where'd you get that spring water?" The boy looked up and looked scared. He ran back into the woods from the side he had came. All the kids in the canoes were kind of freaked out now. After a minute later, my mom heard this. "Where are you, Blondie? What did you say to my boy?" A man and a woman came out of the woods. They both had very long black hair, but the woman's was very long. The man was holding a knife. The woman saw my mom and pointed at her. "Look at her fucking hair. I'm gonna cut it off. I'm gonna cut off all your hair, Blondie." The man and the woman started wading out into the river at a run, and all the kids started paddling for their lives. As they were paddling away, the woman screamed, "You won't get away, you blonde bitch! This is our woods!" They got away and paddled for another 4 hours and were very tired. They had to set up camp because it was getting so dark. They all slept that night, but my mom had never been so scared. They were picked up downriver later that day and went home. They figured those people were moonshiners. I personally think they were just trying to scare them off, but still, my mom thinks that woman was going to kill her. Brush beater. First, a little background information. I teach first grade in a high poverty area. This is rough territory with lots of gangs, hard drugs, and prostitution. Just a couple years ago, the police arrested a woman and several men. The mom had pimped her 2 special needs daughters to the men for money to buy drugs. Suffice it to say, this is not a good area to be alone in, especially after dark. Anyways, it was September and I had a new student. I'll call her Grace. She was very timid, had low self-confidence, and always seemed nervous. I kept a very close watch on her because I know these can be warning signs of abuse. One Monday, as I took my class outside to play, I noticed strange-looking marks on Grace's legs. Little round indentations marched from her calves to her thighs. She was in shorts. The spots were red and looked painful. I thought she might have some kind of skin rash, so I asked her how she got the marks. Grace told me in a nonchalant way that I was being bad after school on Friday, so Daddy had to take the brush to me again. I was dumbfounded and honestly a little confused. A brush? Then I understood. Her father had beaten her with a Bristol brush, hard enough to leave indentations on her skin 2 days later. Now, I'm a mandated reporter and I take it seriously. I called CPS, and they were there that afternoon to talk to Grace and photograph her injuries. At that point, I am out of the pictures and CPS takes over. I don't get updates on the situation, so I had no idea what happened. Grace never returned to school, but her father did. He showed up one evening as I was preparing to leave the school. About 5:30. Parked his truck in such a way that I could not move my car, then jumped out carrying a baseball bat. He screamed invectives at me about how I terrified his daughter because she was in custody, how I was a nosy bitch who didn't know my own goddamn place, and how he was going to show me exactly what bitches like you deserve. He meant it too. The man had the cold eyes of a fish, and I knew if he could, he would do serious harm to me. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't run from him. He was massive and had at least 100 pounds on me, all muscle. If I locked myself in my car, I'd be a sitting duck while he smashed the windows in with a bat. So I said goodbye to my dignity and started screaming for help. Now, I'm petite, but years of teaching had given me the lung power of a megaphone, and I can be loud. People across the street heard me and came out to see what was happening. The great part of working in a small community is that you know everyone, and everyone knows you, especially if you're a teacher. A couple fathers of former students came over to help, while a nearby woman dialed 911. He never did calm down, and kept screaming about all the things he was going to do to me for turning him into the CPS. Even when the police arrived, he continued his tirade. They arrested him, but I'm not sure what the charges were. I don't think they can get him for assault, since he never touched me. For the rest of the school year, I had an armed escort to my car after school. Again, small community, and our police are wonderful people. Interestingly enough, I had someone from one of the local gangs tell me that they were keeping a watch, because I had taught his little sister earlier and she liked me. That was a surreal moment, let me tell you. So, crazy, abusive guy, let's not meet again. But if we do, I'll be prepared. Missing dogs. This happened nearly a year ago today, when I was around 14 or 15 years old. Since I've been lurking around the subreddit for a while, I figured it's a good idea to post my own encounter. Around September 2014, some local couple's dogs had gone missing. They were an elderly couple, and it was pretty sad, because in the area of the South that I live, your dog is your family. Every day I would go out and walk down the roads near the couple's house and would search for them. At the time, a red car with an old man would also drive along the same roads, and I assumed that it was the husband out looking for the dogs as well. He passed by me maybe 15 to 20 times during my walk and then leave. November came, and by now, everyone had figured that the dogs were dead, probably got hit by a car sometime, and no one came forward. One day, I was sitting out by the curb, messing with some plants, and I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, that the red car was circling the street. He'd been passing by for roughly 45 minutes, making U-turns to drive by me, and being the person I am, I pretended that I didn't notice, so that he'd leave me alone. It was getting on my nerves, until suddenly he came flying down the wrong side of the street, nearly hitting another car. He asked me if I needed a ride, to which I politely declined. "You look lost. Sure you don't need a ride?" It was uncomfortable. He kept pressing me to get in the car. "No, actually I live right here, but thank you for the offer." He smiled at me before driving away. I went inside and told my mother about it. How odd it was for that guy to just ask if I needed any help when he knew where I lived. My mom asked what I meant by this. I told her, "You know, that couple, the husband has a red car, doesn't he?" My mother's face went from confusion to concern. "No, their car is white." My mom asked me about all the times I'd seen this car, and shockingly, when I put the pieces together from all the walks I'd taken, I realized that every single walk, starting from July, I had seen that red car pass me, every single time. He had been watching me for months, and when I thought back, I remember him asking me if I needed a ride in August. We ended up calling the police on the man. As soon as I described to the officers what he and his car looked like, they immediately knew who it was. For nearly 30 years, this dude had been preying on young girls, asking them for rides, and trying to bribe them into drugs in exchange for sex. It was disgusting. The county ended up dropping on the stalking charges, claiming that he wasn't aware of his actions all those times. But I know that's not true. I'm always wary of red cars when I take walks now. I slept in my brother's room for nearly a month afterwards, because I was scared that he tried to get revenge. Who knew a dent would lead to this? I'm new here, but I just had to share the story. To give a little subtext, I'm a mid-20s female about 5'2", and I drive a convertible. Trust me, this is important. This happened recently, and ever since I've been on high alert. Now, I work your typical 9-to-5 office job for a large moving company, but from time to time, I have to work our late shift, which is from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., and this happened just as it was starting to get dark around 5 p.m. or so. So it was late September or early October? Somewhere in there anyways. I'm working on one of these late shifts. To give more subtext, I normally work in our site location, about 10 minutes from where I live. But when working late shift, I have to go to our main office, a good 45 minutes commute over 3 freeways. So to say the least, at the end of a late shift, I'm beyond ready to be home, and know I have a good little drive ahead of me. I smoke, so I have my driver's side window down, so I can let the smoke out as I drive and enjoy some fresh air. When I'm driving on the freeway, I have my music up, but as I'm approaching my exit finally, I turn it down, just to listen in case of sirens and whatnot. I'm sitting at a red light now, about a block and a half from home, when a car pulls up alongside me and I hear a, "Hey!" I don't really pay attention, but then I hear another, "Hey, I see your car has a dent." See, told you the car would play into this, and yes, it's true. Above my driver's side tire is a dent, small, and can easily be popped out. I just never had. So I turn my head and see a four-door car like a Toyota Camry, to give an idea, with all the guys in the car in front and back windows down on my side. "I can fix that dent. I have the tools on me if you want to follow me." I yell, "No thank you." And luckily, the light turns green, and I punch it. I just want to get home. When I look back in my mirror, those fuckers change lanes and are following me at this point. I'm freaking out. I'm alone, and the last thing I want to do is lead them to my house. I'm going a good 10 to 15 miles over the speed limit, which is 45, and I drive right past my street and go down a side street a few blocks up that lead to a road that runs along train tracks. On this road, there's a lot of storage warehouses, and when I don't see them directly behind me coming around a turn, then haul it into one of the warehouse entrance and cut my car off so no lights were on, and I sit there watching my rearview mirror. I'm shaking at this point, and when I see headlights, I hold my breath for what feels like forever before they pass by. I sat there a while longer and lit up another smoke, because at this point, my nerves are shot. After a few minutes, I leave as quickly as possible, as I make it home and hug my kids tight. I had never been approached like that, but now I keep a clear eye out and will roll my window up after a smoke. Escaped felon Bucky Phillips. Just a bit of background information. When I was a freshman in college in the fall of 2006, there was an escaped convict from Western New York named Bucky Phillips, who was in prison for burglary, out on parole, then put back in for parole violation, where he escaped and shot 3 state troopers in 2 separate shootings, killing 1. He fled into the woods after being pursued after the first shooting, where he survived on the lam from June through September. He was known for breaking into people's houses and hunting cabins and stealing guns, food, and other supplies in which he needed to survive. Anyways, I lived in the dorms and immediately became friends with the guy that lived in the dorm next to me. Let's call him John. John and I had a lot of similar interests, including hunting and fishing, and after discussing our hobbies, he informed me that his family owned a large piece of property in northwestern Pennsylvania, and it was only an hour and 15 minutes away from where we went to school. After about a month of being neighbors, we played football, so it was close to the end of summer. He and I became fast friends. He invited me to come home with him and scout the property and hang some tree stands before the archery season started, to which I agreed. This was right in September. John's property was beautiful, 200 plus acres, butting right up to the Allegheny National Forest, essentially nestled in the side of the mountains. Getting in kinda late on a Friday, and being busy visiting his friends all day Saturday, we waited until Sunday to scout. We woke up early on Sunday, as we had to be back to school that night, and we still had a few tree stands to hang. John gave me a tour of the property, showing me food plots, blinds, stationary stands, etc. As we were looping around the back end of his property, I distinctly remember him picking up a granola bar wrapper saying, "How the fuck did this get up here? I'm so sick of people littering." But I thought this was weird, because there were no other houses around for miles. The National Forest was nearby, with no hiking trails anywhere around, and we were on the side of a gigantic hill. I just chalked it up to the wind carrying it up there, and didn't think much about it. As we neared the end of the tour, we came up to a landmark on John's property, a small run-down-looking barn about 200 yards from the house, completely concealed by the trees, where he kept his tree stands and other stuff. But everything of value, like their ATVs, were kept in their garage. That's when I noticed another chewy granola bar wrapper on the floor of the barn. It looked very out of place, because everything in there had a rustic look about it, poorly lit, thick layer of dust over everything. Then, this chewy granola bar wrapper sitting there all bright and shiny, I said, "Dude, I think someone's been in your shed." And in fact, he had agreed. There was a padlock on the double barn-style doors that was broken off that he hadn't even thought about, and the dust cleared off of several items in the shed. It looked as if someone brushed it aside with their hands. He called his mom to let her know someone had been in there, but he seemed more pissed off than anything. After grabbing the stands and the ATVs, we went and hung them and made our way back to school, which is where we heard the 2-day-old news that Bucky Phillips had shot 2 more cops and was on the run again. And that's when our imaginations started running. What if it was Bucky Phillips on the property? What if he was watching us on the property the whole day and we never saw him? What if John's family is in danger? Then we sort of ignored it, because we realized that all that took place in Western New York. The following week, there was a non-stop hype about Bucky Phillips on our campus. Anytime a stranger was walking across our campus, word started spreading that they caught Bucky at our school that night. Police were warning people to stay inside after dark and not to open the doors for anyone, etc. It got a bit annoying to a point where we couldn't walk somewhere after dark without being stopped at least twice by the cops to check to see if we were Bucky Phillips. Then that following Friday came up when Bucky was pulled over, crossing the PA-NY border in a stolen car, and he jumped out and fled into the woods, bordering a golf course, within a few miles of John's property, before surrendering to state police. Evidently, after John told his mom someone broke into the barn, nobody came to investigate, because they figured someone broke in and left, and it wasn't a priority since nothing was stolen. Well, that day, John's brother came home from school only to be greeted by dozens of PA state troopers sweeping his woods and inspecting the shed. The police never confirmed or denied if it was Bucky Phillips in the shed that day that we went scouting, but I have a very strong suspicion that it was. It's kind of crazy to think that I could have been within a few yards of an FBI top 10 most wanted and a US Marshals 15 most wanted criminal who could have easily blown my brains out without anyone knowing for days. Bucky Phillips, let's not meet. Beautiful girl. This happened around 6 months ago, on my way to my car after work. I work at a movie theater, so I often don't leave work until 1 or 2 a.m. I live in your typical moderately sized city, some bad areas, some good areas, and 2 or 3 violent crimes a year. I was leaving late one night in September, and it was unseasonably hot that night. There didn't appear to be anyone around, and I stopped outside the theater doors to search for my car keys, when I heard a man say, "You're beautiful." Let me just say that I'm not ugly, but I'm not exactly attractive enough for men to say this to me generally, especially not in a deserted parking lot in the middle of the night. I couldn't see him at first. He was pressed against the side of the building in the dark. He stepped out in front of me and into the light. He was middle-aged and utterly normal-looking. No crazy crackhead eyes, no wild disheveled clothes, except that he was wearing a thick sweater, long pants, and boots, in 80-degree weather. I muttered thank you and quickly found my keys. Walking past him, he started following me closely enough to clip the back of my shoes. He said, "Do you have a big, strong man to take care of you? Is he here to warm the car up for you, clean off the snow for you?" Mind you, again, it's 80 degrees out. I mumbled something I don't remember and got my cell phone out, dialed my husband. When he answered, I calmly said, "Hi, baby, I'm heading home. Did you eat dinner?" "Just normal crap." I didn't want the man behind me to get agitated by me telling my husband a crazy man is following me. I just wanted the man to know there was someone listening in. This did not deter the man much. He backed off maybe a step, but continued to speak to me. He said, "Is that the big strong man you have? Why isn't he here to take care of you? I'll take care of you." And he reached out and stroked my hair. My husband was oblivious, talking to me about a movie he was watching. I took off running, and the man followed me, but he didn't run after me. I reached my car and got in. By the time I got it started up and in gear, he was standing by the passenger window. He pulled on the door handle, but I had locked the doors again. I reversed and pulled out of the parking lot. He stood there and waved. I then finally told my husband what was going on, and he had our son get on the phone with me while he went to call the police from the house phone. They did a search of the parking lot, but the man was gone by then. I told the managers at work, and they arranged for someone to walk me to my car afterwards. I saw the man again a few weeks later. He came in during business hours and hung around the concession stand. After the lobby cleared out, he said, "Hello, beautiful girl. Do you remember me?" I called the manager and they asked him to leave. I haven't seen him since, but I still vividly remember his hand in my hair. Light 'em up. First of all, I want to say I'm Lithuanian, so my grammar will not be perfect by any means. So this happened like 4 years back. I am 19 years old now, soon to be 20, but I still get chills whenever I think about what happened that particular day. I live in a medium-sized city where about 70 to 80,000 people lives, and at the time, I was living in almost the city center. I took about 3 to 5 minutes to walk to the main part of our city, where every weekend, a lot of people come to take a walk, just chill or to drink. Every September, our city holds a festival to name the birth of the city, and it usually takes place all weekend long, and you can already tell that a lot of people, especially teens, comes and spends their evening drinking and just ruining the atmosphere of the whole festival. At the time, I was 15 to 16 years old, and that was my first time going to that huge concert with my friends, not with my parents anymore. I was so pumped up, I felt like I was a grown-up person. Parents told me to get home before midnight. Of course, that was never going to happen, because the fireworks was scheduled at midnight. My friends were not the ones you usually see talking nicely and chatting to random people. They were rude, disrespectful, and kind of searching for problems. Well, with that being said, there's no surprise we found what we were looking for. After the fireworks came to an end, we decided to go home. We all live in the same block, so we were all chatting and going home. We were walking and chatting about random things, when suddenly, we realized one friend of ours, who were with us all the time, was missing. We decided to call him, and he replied. It was dead silent in the background, and the voice from the phone told us, "I'm home, getting ready to sleep, catch you tomorrow." I wasn't the one talking to him, my other friend was, but when he heard those words, his face turns red really fast. He realized that the voice from the phone that he has just heard was not the voice of our friend. Maybe he was lying down and he stayed up at the concert, but first of all, there's no point of him to do that. And second, as I told before, the background was dead silent. We decided to go to his apartment and tell his parents what just happened. So, we walked towards the house he lives in, and we started to hear some guys talking really silently, and continuously trying to light up a lighter. Just as we crossed the side of the house, we see like 6 or 7 guys holding on to our friend, mouth all taped up, and on his knees trying to light his jacket. We start to shout at them from a distance, so the people living around can see what's happening, until one of the guys pulls out a knife and starts running towards us. We all start to run as fast as we could in different directions, and that must have been the biggest mistake we made. He was going right after me, and I felt that he was gaining on me really fast. I knew that if he catches me, nothing good is going to happen, so I tried to run to some place where I can run into some other people. Suddenly, I felt a hand pulling my jacket, and I fell down really hard. My hands were bleeding, but I did not feel that at the moment. He hit me with a knife when he caught me, and I was on my back, looking right in his eyes, and he said something like, "So, boy from my home address, wanna say your goodbyes?" And right after he said that, my friend, the one who was missing, slammed him to the back with a huge metal pipe. The guy fell, quickly got to his feet, and ran away. Without any words coming from our mouths, we looked with our friend to each other, and we ran separate ways to our homes. I know it might have been a really bad idea, but that was just from pure instinct. Next day, I met with my friends in a yard where we used to play basketball and talked about everything that happened last night. As it appears, my friend, who was surrounded by other guys, had his arms held behind his back, with his pockets full of quite powerful explosives, which were being used at the New Year's Eve. So the guy we faced was trying to ignite it, and others held him so he couldn't move or take them out of his pockets. It might have been the thing to forget after those years, but the fact that I was looking in his eyes, and he told my own home address with a demonic smile on his face, every time I think about it, gives me the chills just to think about it, even after so long. Luckily, nothing happened after that, and I sure as hell hope that we will never ever meet again. Guys with explosives. The man in the window. I'm a 24-year-old male, and I've lived in the same house since I was 22 months old. Weird, I know, but that's what happens if you don't quite get the grades to go to university nowadays. Anyways, the house is in a small bungalow on a quiet back street. No one ever tries to sell us anything. No one ever passes by, because the street is only open at one end. My room is obviously on the ground floor. It faces our front garden where the street is. My room's always vaguely orange from a street lamp on the other side of the road. My bed is right by the window. I have thin voiles up in the window. I've never been able to sleep in complete darkness, and that suits me just fine. I remember one balmy September night back in 2010. I had recently started a college course after having had a year of wondering what the heck to do. I was still unused to the routine of 9 to 4 weekdays and was sleeping well, but on this particular night, it was warm, so I left the window open, and it took me some time to get to sleep. I had no idea I'd even managed to sleep until I woke up with a start. I had no idea what the time was, but the room was cold, so I began to muster up the strength to get out of bed and close the window. Suddenly, there was a loud, high-pitched bang right in front of my face. I couldn't work out what could have made such a sound, so I came to the conclusion that I must have still been asleep. Bang! There it was again. Bang! Bang! I couldn't work out what was going on. Then I noticed it. The outline of a head and shoulders, no more than 2 feet away from my face on the other side of the window. I froze for what seemed to be like a minute, but was probably no more than 5 seconds. I had time to note that it was a man looking right at me. He was holding a set of car keys in his left hand, as one might hold a dagger in a silent film. I lunged upwards, and he turned and ran down the path that ran alongside my house. I heard him step on the inspection cover, which always made a metallic sound when someone walked on it. He had clearly been banging on my window with the keys. I realized that was what had woken me up. I'm sorry to say that I don't remember his face. I'd love to say that it was terrifying, but I doubt that it was. Night-night. Just don't look too closely when you close the curtains this evening.